Yuji Itadori, the main character of Jujutsu Kaisen. Yuji to me is special, one of my favourite characters, and he's a key driving factor to my enjoyment of the story. He's a subversion of the main character, as well as all the makings of what makes a main character. Genetically blessed, a broken moveset, and the driving factor of the series. But oh wait, this is where he isn't. Yuji isn't always the focal point of the series. Yuji also isn't everybody's favourite character. Yuji Itadori is a fake main character, which is the prominent critiques surrounding his character. With the most recent chapter, Yuji has steadily been beating up Sukuna, building up the anticipation of all his hard work paying off, to legit be cast aside when there was greater interest from Sukuna's point of view, in the newly awakened Yuta. This has spurred conversations that Yuji isn't appreciated enough. With this, I will analyse Yuji Itadori's character as the role as the false main character, why this is intentional, and why the payoff will be special, and insight to one of Jujutsu Kaisen's greatest characters, Yuji Itadori. The protagonist. For myself, the protagonist being my favourite character in the series is very 40-60. I normally gravitate to side characters a lot more because I feel the impact they have on the series with such limited time in comparison to the main focus always resonates with me. I'm also an antagonist type of person, and pretty much all my favourite works of fiction has a captivating antagonist to support the story. But what makes a protagonist? Or a proper protagonist? Well, when you think of any manga, and I'll give you examples, they are normally front and centre the character you focus on just based on how the story is structured. If I brought up Dragon Ball, the first person you'll think of is Goku. If I brought up One Piece, the first person you'll think of is Luffy. For the most part, due to them being the vocal point of the series, they're the most remembered character as you follow their journey primarily through their character point of view. Whereas with Jujutsu Kaisen, the character that you probably think of first is Gojo Satoru. A big reason why an uncomfortable part of the fanbase says he's the main character, which is a very bad take, but this isn't the point of this video. Yuji is intentionally a passenger within his series, which is where we reach the protagonist problem. However, Jujutsu Kaisen takes a lot of inspiration from other stories, such as a Hunter x Hunter, where Gon, who is one of the greatest characters in the series, the best depending on who you talk to. However, he may not always be the vocal point, and is why an arc like the Succession War can occur in the first place. Even characters such as Kenjaku, who show a similar cog-type role within Tokyo Ghoul, and you're left with sometimes wondering why do you gravitate to other characters within this series more. The underlying answer is there's no real way to write a protagonist. Assigning rules based on previous stories when the story they are trying to tell is completely different is a bad way to look at things, and rather judge the story based on the parameters it's set. So with that in mind, why is Yuji written the way he is? My first ever Yuji analysis is in this video here, and I'm also talked about the cycles within his character, and how it can evolve within the series, and how we got to the Yuji we see today. But with the focus on his title as the main character, we have to understand the story Gege Akutami is trying to tell. In the interview, Gege said the message of Jujutsu Kaisen is no one is right. Each character is guided by their ethics. To expand on this, ideals and self is the most pivotal direction Jujutsu Kaisen has focused on, and you can see it with the multitude of casts, whether on the good side or bad, having different opinions, which serves as clashes of truth. Now, how does this connect to Yuji? If the story Gege is trying to tell is that no one is right, having the main focus primarily on one person would completely hinder the initial message of the story. This can be shown from structural perspective that Yuji isn't always going to be the focus, as one of the structures of the biggest arcs, his main conflict is normally served as a final meal to top off the individual conflicts between other characters. The best example of this is the structure of Shibuya, and how Mahito and Yuji, probably the biggest fight within the arc, was left until the end. But we had moments of Toji Megumi, Choso Yuji, Jogo Sukuna, Gojo's ceiling, all moments that built up on character interactions and focus on the individual ethics and mindset. But I won't go into that in detail, I'd like to one day get into arc reviews. But for the most important thing is, Yuji isn't a fake main character. He's a perfect character for what the story is trying to tell. But now let's really deep dive into Yuji, because if the story is a combination of ideals and clashes of truth, and the journey of oneself, Yuji being the embodiment of the perfect ideal of a Jujutsu sorcerer seems to be the pathway Gege is trying to achieve with his character. What does it mean to be a Jujutsu sorcerer? Well, this question is very hard to answer. Multiple sorcerers have their own morals within the job description, and there isn't necessarily a right answer. But one thing a Jujutsu sorcerer must do is keep moving forward. The eternal struggler, and if one word could represent Yuji more, it would be the struggler. And he continues to inherit the wishes of his fallen brethren to continue at the task at hand. But in 248, which I'll forever say is one of the greatest chapters in the series, Sukuna admitted he has an unbreakable ideal. To truly understand the significance of this, we have to see how Yuji has grown from a person who was non-existent to the Jutsu world to the future Eye of the Storm. One of my favourite quotes, "Heroes aren't born, but are made." Well, the quote is my favourite because it's also very wrong and frankly misused. You can be moulded into a hero, but some people are just born with traits that make them crazily courageous that will end up performing acts of heroism. Now Yuji is a combination of both. Even Gojo commented how he's crazy as a Jujutsu sorcerer. His strong will has been there from early, and even the smallest acts of kindness to be in the Cult Cup because he needed to fill the quota. The reason for Yuji's hero complex is as simple as he's lonely. He wants to be surrounded by people because he's lonely. He wants to die a death surrounded by people because he doesn't want to be lonely. Something very human and very realistic. Humans gravitate to bonds and connections as is what connects us to humanity and truly shows us we are alive. The simple goal becomes a driving factor of his character arc, now the crux of his freakish drive to power through anything. This is connected to his idea of a good death. And do bear in mind I'm focusing on the internal aspects that make up Yuji, before the external which will build up to his entire role as the main character. But a good death is contingent on the resolve of being a good person. Now as I said, the idea of what a good person is subjective in Jujutsu Kaisen. As the reader, we will most definitely co-sign Yuji's ideology because Yuji is so damn human. One of my favourite aspects is even how his name is ingrained in his entire philosophy. Yuji, U translated to distant or calm. G translated to benevolence, compassion, or more importantly, humanity. Itadori. Ita translates to tiger, and Dori translates to cane or a staff. Now let's make the connection to his character. Yuji, the idea of being calm and distant might not be the best reflection of his nature. However, it can detail his overall usage in the story. Yuji's moments are normally lost, and are provided in the highest level of delayed gratification, that no matter how much he's punished, he'll continue to push on. This nicely connects with the tiger analogy, who are strong and brave, and Yuji on multiple occasions will throw himself in the worst situation as long as he can achieve his goal, the ultimate struggler. The tiger in Buddhism is also seen as a representation to overcome obstacles in their journey to achieve enlightenment, which couldn't fit Yuji more. The cane staff analogy is perfect to represent support. Yuji could be seen as the backbone to humanity in a world of monsters. He's truest in staying to his conviction, which is supported by Sukuna's comments of his unbreakable will, which will also support my statement that he's the perfect representation of the ideal Jujutsu sorcerer, but I'll touch on that a little later. The most important translation though is humanity. On a multitude of occasions, Yuji is the most human character in the series, even in the face of all the inhumane things he's done. He's guided by the purest form of self-sacrifice and pushing of helping others. So much so he'll do anything on their behalf. The internal conflict surrounding Yuji is how he deals with his own humanity and how externally is thrown back in his face, yet still clings to the one thing that pushes him forward. How is usually constantly coming back again and again. He's ridiculed by his antagonists. The narrative punished him over and over again, but like a boomerang, no matter how far you throw him, he'll always come right back. Yuji's internal struggle correlates to why he's non-existent within the narrative, because his benefit of what he provides to others kinda similar to Yuta. A lot of people judge him on the criteria of individual fights, when a character that is reliant on others always excels with team-ups, till the moment where he has to lock in for the last stretch. Using even the name analogy, he's the perfect support. It can still be front and center, but his dependency on a role to alleviate his loneliness is perfectly supported with his best work being done in pairs. Todo and Yuji against Mahito and Hanami, even more recently with his team up with Yuta against Sukuna. His need to have a place to belong is complemented by his showcase in the story, but why is that? Well, Yuji severely lacks a strong sense of self. Granted, a lot of it is self-inflicted, but even his birth has reduced the title of Sukuna's vessel. Yuji isn't characterized as Yuji the character, rather the thing he's meant to destroy. When people who don't know Yuji, they don't ask who is that, they say that's Sukuna's vessel. He's been facilitated by the creator, which inherently means the title as the main character has been imposed onto him. It's even ironic that Yuji is known for his love of movies, yet he feels like a passenger within his own story. Being directed by overarching force, the role Yuji has been put in is very, very intentional. The only people who acknowledge Yuji beyond his role are those who share connection to him, and probably those who he shares strong bonds with. Within Jujutsu Kaisen, the one with stronger sense of self has an overarching impact on the narrative, and it can be shown with how both Gojo and Sukuna are characterized through other characters before they even make their own impression. This can even be shown through someone such as Maki. From the Kyoto students, he was just a weaker Zenin. From the higher-ups granted is controlled by the Zenin, she was just a failure. She internally classed herself as an outcast because that was what was shown to her, until she broke her fate. She's now Maki Zenin, the monster. The moment she gains more agency within the story, the narrative portrays her differently, which is a great thing I love in Jujutsu Kaisen's writing. Whereas Yuji has always been passed on as an accessory to the overarching narrative, until he meets Mahito. Before I touch on to Mahito, the earlier struggles within Yuji eternally places him in a conflicting manner within the narrative. This doesn't fully go away until Sukuna leaves his body, and even still with most recent chapters. But with his own self-doubt within his own conviction, the overarching plot shackles him to his role as a vessel. His placement as a main character was solely tied to the keeping of Sukuna, which is why the focus of the story could be so varied. The exploration of other truths would come to pass because Yuji in himself was still figuring out what his ideals are, and his why Todo's speech in Shibuya is very significant. But let's focus on one of Yuji's greatest dynamics with Mahito. The Cog mindset is one of the best things towards Jujutsu Kaisen's themes as a whole, but what it does for both Mahito and Yuji's character is an extension of the overarching narrative. Jujutsu Kaisen is very cynical. Errors seem to repeat to an extent, and the continued cycle of the strong and the weak and the conditions of Jujutsu sorcerers are perpetual. Curse energy shackles users to an inescapable fate, and that was told to us as early as chapter 58, a Jujutsu sorcerer will die alone. So to make the job description bearable, humans gravitate to a role to make their life fulfilling. The life of Jujutsu sorcerer is just as Geto said, a marathon game with your dead brothers and sisters at the end. It's a continual cycle of exercise and repeat, to the point they are stripped of their individuality to serve the greater good, which is showcased within Yuji Itadori. But Mahito and Yuji show what can happen when you focus on the intricacies of that bigger cycle. When Yuji accepts he's just like a cog, it's in the mindset of wanting to defeat Mahito. He understands they are two functioning chess pieces in a far bigger game, but beyond that fight he's clinging to said mindset, and what is the reason for that? Well, it goes back to what I said about Yuji. He's lonely. Everything special about him is a byproduct of something else, so he uses his gifts of service to others. The moral standard of Jujutsu sorcery he upholds is Nanami, and why he takes on his share of suffering, because the first person that acknowledges him not as a vessel, not as Yuji Itadori, but as the role he wants to excel in, a Jujutsu sorcerer. Being a cog gives Yuji a purpose, a role to play, and surrounded by others that he'll eventually pass on to the future. Yuji said it himself, this is his role within this fight. Maybe his actions won't have meaning now, but it gives him a purpose. Something very consistent with Yuji throughout the manga, the occult club, becoming a Jujutsu sorcerer, Sukuna's vessel, fulfilling his role by self-sacrifice to help free Gojo. Bear in mind when Yuji lost his resolve, where he blamed himself for everything that went wrong with Sukuna in Shibuya, Megami asking him to save him is what brought him back into action. Nanami telling him to take it from here is what kept him going. Nobara's appearance is what gave him strength again. And finally, Todo's speech of what have you been entrusted with revitalized him. Not his own actions, but he's the most selfish individual in the manga, and by a long shot. And more recently, Sukuna said it best, being the one to save Megami due to his soul punches. You finally have a role to play. The reason for Yuji's purpose narratively and structurally within the manga is when his role is needed to fill, which is why he can be plugged and taken away from the narrative so easily, because his role is tied to a specific purpose which I'll touch on later. Conceptually, the cog mindset is who Yuji is, however has been hammered to the extreme. He said it straight to Hikari, this is his role to play, The overwhelming self-sacrifice can intrigue Hikari's fever, as is reflective of who Itadori is. The Cog mentality is representation on the greater conversation of humans versus curses, but for Yuji it's his claim to becoming the ultimate Jujutsu sorcerer, or rather the ideal of what makes a Jujutsu sorcerer. But let me pause this real quick. Mahito, being his perfect foil, searches for the opposite and uses Yuji as a guide to his own evolution. Mahito dubs himself a true curse. To him, the cycle of curses is the byproduct of life, and he chooses to focus on his instincts as a curse to gravitate towards his decisions. Nihilism. Mahito believes the world just exists, there is no meaning to it. You should live to your stature. Very similar to Sukuna, right? The most important aspect with Mahito is he accepts the cards dealt with him, and only takes pleasure from his own intuition. However, he's a hypocrite, or maybe ignorant fits a little better. But let me save this for a little later. One thing Mahito said with me stuck with me forever. In this world, only I understand the soul composition. In Shibuya, he also stated his curse technique shapes his worldview. The idea that he lives in a peerless world, only something he can understand, made him special. But because this one gift made him special, it became second nature to him. Something that separated him from others, a blessing to view the world in an entirely different manner. But what if someone came and invaded your space? What if someone flipped your worldview and showed you aren't as special as you think? Once you place these things together, the hatred Mahito has for Yuji is understood even more. Beyond the role of human versus curses and how nature has set them up to be mortal enemies, Yuji is his natural enemy because he threatens his very existence as his unparalleled freedom has been stolen. For my JoJo fans, remember when Dio realized Jotaro could also stop time. His aim changed from just killing, but to beat him within that space because it's inconceivable that someone could share the same realm as him. It's perfectly applicable to Mahito, but to a greater scale with their respective roles, and makes the clash personal. It also boils down to Mahito being a hypocrite. If he was truly as nihilistic as he said, the moment when faced with death, he would accept it graciously as it's just a passing of time. But he cries, whines, and showcases he's the worst case of humanity, fully cementing the dynamic between Yuji and Mahito, and even why Jogo propped him up as the true human. Yuji is forced to admit he's wrong, and Mahito is forced to admit he's also wrong, leading to a conclusion of no one is truly happy. This is a clash of right or wrong, to decide who will last in the end. Wrong. This is a clash to find out we're truly human, because human beings are overwhelmingly flawed. An idea that has always been said is Mahito is the next Sukuna. I understand the concept, but Mahito's over-fascination with humanity restricts him from truly reaching that level, especially as he viewed Nobara as a natural enemy, simply due to her ability to breach his safety, his soul. But then again, Sukuna seems to be on a similar path, with his overwhelming resentment for Yuji and remembering Gojo forever. Not very hedonistic, but I'll get to that in another time. Mahito and Yuji's entire conflict is two opposing beings forced to interact with each other. Both cannot exist and they are doomed to fight eternally until one wins. The purest form of humanity versus the purest form of humanity, but in two completely different ways. But I don't want to focus too much on the actual Mahito-Yuji dynamic, because this is a commentary on the role as a main character. The Mahito-Yuji fight set up the platform of what a Jujutsu sorcerer must do, and it's simply kill curses. The world is unfair. Yuki said it best. Humans create negative emotions and sorcerers are stuck in this never-ending cycle of defeating them. So Yuji destroying the embodiment of humanity's darkest fear is narrative very important, as that is his role. The main character of Jujutsu Kaisen isn't Yuji Itadori, it's a Jujutsu sorcerer. Now what do I mean when I say that? Well, first, when Kenjaku said Yuji is the eye of the storm, it perfectly encapsulates what I mean. The two characters who Yuji has dubbed as a true curse are both Sukuna and Mahito, and he asks both of them pretty much the same question: how can they continue to spread misery? In Mahito's case being the baby version of Sukuna, he takes interest into Yuji and rather tells him if he can't accept he's just like him, he'll never be able to defeat him. Whereas Sukuna continues to separate the line between him and humanity, to say an insect is too weak and cannot match up to his stature. The role of Yuji, the main character, is to destroy these curses, however it's a little bit more complicated than that. Let's spin back to Principal Yaga, as he asks a question that I believe encapsulates how people view Jujutsu sorcery. When I said what is the ideal Jujutsu sorcerer, it's a selfish individual who continues to kill curses and struggles even when things are going bad. Basically, Yuji Itadori. But what did the principal of Jujutsu Kaisen say to Yuji when he came with his resolve? Yaga tells him the opposite of what it means to be a Jujutsu sorcerer. He says a goal on behalf of someone else is insufficient and disqualifies him on becoming a Jujutsu sorcerer. Not to mention, he even stated the more selfish goal of delaying your execution would be better, and only accepts his resolve when Yuji says he will not regret the way he lives. Why would the principal of the school push away a selfless person? Well, it's what Urume said best. The sorcerers of this era have an obsession to remain human. It is that fear of being alone that makes them weak. Yaga scorns Yuji, not because his ideal to be a Jujutsu sorcerer was wrong, it's just his ideal wasn't human. When I said what is a Jujutsu sorcerer supposed to be? Being selfless all the time, regardless of deaths continuing to push forward, to become a machine. It's not sustainable, it will lead you to curse those around you. So Yaga's question is plainly rooted in his humanity. Yaga said it best, a Jujutsu sorcerer always dies with regrets. It's not feasible to always be locked in. It's not relatable to have so many near-death experiences and feel nothing. What they ask of these children is an impossible task, so Yaga asks for a realistic answer. When I said earlier, what does it mean to be a Jujutsu sorcerer? The answer has been skewed because there aren't cogs in a machine, they're human beings replicating a cycle. Megami's answer is different. Gojo's answer is different. Nanami's answer is different. The only one being true to the ideal of Jujutsu sorcery is Yuji, and that's why he's our main character. To destroy curses, a very simple goal. The two characters that embody what it means to be a true curse, being the most important opponents being Sukuna and Mahito, thematically makes all the sense. So the understanding is set up, how he's written, why his role has been what it is. So why is Yuji sometimes sidelined, or like in the most recent chapter legit thrown to the side? The story of Jujutsu Kaisen rewards agency and selfishness. Those with a drive to achieve something are normally rewarded, and staying true to your nature is supported within the manga. In the most simplistic manner, Sukuna is the narrative. The story conforms to his ideal, is why people are blessed or punished based on how they conform to his ideal. Let's use the examples. Gojo's identity crisis leading to his ceiling. Megami shaped his mentality surrounding Sumiki, got his body snatched and watched his sister die in his own body. Mekamaru's entire plan was to wait for Gojo, and the focus throughout his clash is how he can see everybody else and he dies. Now let's use the flip side. When Megami awakens his domain, it isn't Gojo's words that motivate him, it's Sukuna saying he's a wasted treasure. When Maki receives her power, she forgets everything, destroys her clan, and achieves enlightenment against Naya when she truly becomes free, disregarding everything. When Yuta goes to Sendai Colony, what takes him over the edge is just this once he will enjoy the fight. There's multiple examples, but the entire point is that those who follow Sukuna's mindset are rewarded whether consciously or subconsciously. It even supports his entire statement in chapter 3. A hierarchy not purely based on strength is boring to me. And you see Sukuna legit talking to the audience, it feels as if he's stamping the framework of this series from as early as possible. My favourite aspect is how the narrative has been characterizing him until he's free. The embodiment of Jujutsu sorcery Tengen has shown a form similar to Sukuna in their path to enlightenment. Gojo, what he represents within the Jujutsu society, is the exact same thing as to how Sukuna was showcased within the higher era, the ultimate strength holder and having the entire era scared of their wrath. As I said before, the main character is characterized due to his presence. He strips everybody from their individuality because he's the most dominant figure within the series. So now all these pieces are in place, and Yuji's showcase within the story makes a lot more sense. Sukuna is the embodiment of freedom. With the hedonistic nature, he does what he wants. Now Yuji being the antithesis to his idea, a cog, a machine, no agency, ultimate selflessness, is understood why he's the most punished character, constantly battling through hardships, because he's figuratively and literally fighting against Sukuna throughout the entire manga. And then the most important aspect of all, what if the embodiment of freedom is trapped with his complete opposite? Sukuna, the person with the ultimate freedom, an obsession with freedom, is trapped by a person weaker than him. Not to mention Sukuna, anytime he is free, breaks his will, kills those close to him, makes him commit acts that make Yuji lose his resolve. Yet he still comes back. Sukuna isn't one to be disinterested in others or dismiss people for no reason. He's actually somewhat reasonable at times with complimenting Jogo, teaching Kashimo, and showing appreciation to Gojo. But Yuji, you're boring. You don't interest in me. There isn't an interesting thing about you. he hates Yuji because he's what he completely rejects. Even if Sukuna doesn't agree with someone's mentality, he tells them how it is and moves on with his day. But with Yuji, he can't stand it, and the series in itself is an extension of Sukuna. Why Yuji can feel out of place all fits together. Sukuna has always been a character where his temperament to trying in a fight is dependent on how interested he is. So even narratively fighting with Yuji and Todo, him throwing Yuji to the side when Yuta pops up is further forcing the ideal. It's not even just from Sukuna's side. Look at the main cast are actively keeping plans away from him, mainly because of the fear of Sukuna. Yuta becoming the monster, Todo being back. All these humans and monsters are constantly trying to sidestep from the machine that won't quit, as well as the monster is trying to fight. He's in the spotlight, then removed so quickly at the next. It gives you question marks on what is the true purpose of Yuji. If I'm completely honest, I can't say. Does Yuji stay on the path to become the ultimate machine, being the antithesis to Sukuna, but ending up only being a pawn of Kenjaku because he doesn't gain any agency within himself? Or does he break out from that established role, becomes more of Yuji Itadori the human, not Yuji Itadori the Jujutsu sorcerer, we find a whole new breakthrough on his path of enlightenment? Yuji Itadori is an interesting character because there's so many routes Gege can go with his character, and his placement as the main character is what makes Jujutsu Kaisen work so well. So to answer the most important question of all, is Yuji a fake protagonist? No. Yuji Itadori is the perfect protagonist for Jujutsu Kaisen and will be one of the greatest within anime manga.